Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Ask of the Show, where you get to ask questions of someone you may not be able to interact with on a day-to-day basis. It's a place to grow, learn, understand, and educate for everyone. That's the glue. I'm one of the hosts, Big Irish J, and
I'm Kev on stage. And today we have Ask a Prison Abolitionist with Rhythm King. She's a longtime friend of mine on Twitter and Instagram. She's been supporting me for a very long time. She's come to comedy shows when I was in her city, and she has challenged my way of thinking on many occasions. And today she's going to challenge yours because she is a prison abolitionist who believes the entire prison industrial complex should be done away with. That's right, no prisons at all. So, Sister Rhythm, please explain to us, first question, how on earth could we as a society thrive with no prisons?
I'm happy to answer that question. Can I start by saying thank you? Thank you for this.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And tell us about yourself. I apologize.
Thank you. You're like, let's get to it. Thank you for this space, not just today, but your Kev, your platforms in general. But ASCA in particular is a place where I've learned things and where I've been intentional about tuning in and listening to things that people have to say. And learning about things that I don't know about, because I don't know everything, despite what I do believe about myself. My name is Stephanie Keene. I am originally from Greenville, South Carolina. I now live outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So I do consider Philly like a second home. And I have, 20 years experience in doing community education work. I've done sexual health education. I've done domestic violence education. And most recently, I guess, as connected to all of that, because I don't see it separately, I'm a prison abolitionist. So I'm here to convince Kevin and Jay and everybody else to burn it all down.
So one of the first questions that we got, which is like, I love it. For the people who don't know, what's a prison abolitionist?
Okay. This is a good place to start.
What?
That's a good place to start. Yeah. So prison abolitionist, and this is me broadly speaking about like how I feel and believe and what most prison abolitionists feel and believe. But this is not like the prison abolitionist definition, okay. If there is one. But essentially, believing that as what we're witnessing in the streets, police serve mainly one purpose, which is to be violent and abusive, primarily towards Black and brown folks and other marginalized people. And that has been their historic purpose. And it like literally they were created to like go catch people who escaped slavery. So like
I was going to ask you, is that I've been seeing that on Twitter. I didn't know if that was originally where police came from as slave catchers.
Yeah, so they've just extended their purpose. And so similarly, abolitionists, prison abolitionists, police abolitionists, most of us don't see this as separation from slavery abolition. It's just a continuation. It's where abolition is in 2020. So we've in title anyway, abolished slavery, and now we're working to abolish the systems that continue, just with different names. So an important thing to point out, and this will probably come up in the questions, is we're not suggesting only like shut down the prisons. Like it's not shut down the prisons and our work is done. The question is, what are the resources and needs of people and communities that aren't being met that then lead to actions that are criminalized that then lead to people being in prison, right? So, that includes housing and education and, healthy food sources. So abolition isn't just the tearing down of the systems that we feel are harmful, but it's also what are we putting in place for people? What are we providing for people? And so when you see the hashtag, I'm sorry, I'm sure I'm like jumping ahead, but when you see the hashtag or like defund the police, right? People aren't just saying take the money away from the police. People are saying, and let the people decide what we do with those funds. Put those funds into communities, answer the questions and the problems and the needs that communities have had for decades that don't go answered. And when they are answered, it's answered by sending the police to then criminalize folks who have needs. So the question of how police abolition or prison abolition, the ways that societies have done before this system existed. I think the thing that people forget is that there was a time before police, and there will be a time after police. There was a time before prison, and there will be a time after prison. And so I don't know if y'all remember, there was a I can't remember what the protest. It might have been a protest against y'all's president when he first got elected.
Y'all.
Who else?
Jay's president.
Hey, man.
All right, I'll take it. That's fine. I didn't vote for him. On the record, did not vote for Trump, but yeah, I'll take it.
Be clear.
I understand I'm the representative of the whites, so I'll take that.
But no, there was a particular, it's escaping my mind, but I think it was like marches against, maybe during his inauguration. But there was a white teenager who like got in the face of this indigenous elder.
Oh yes, I remember that.
Yeah.
With the drum banging.
Yes. And so when the elder was interviewed after that, and forgive me for not remembering his name, when he was interviewed after that, he said, he was talking about, this country that was stolen from Native people. And he said, there were no walls here. What was it?
Nathan Phillips.
And he I'm summarizing poorly, but he said, there were no walls here. There were no prisons here. Like, this is what, colonizers came and built on this space. But this space existed before without walls, without cages, without prisons. And so we just need to figure out collectively how to get back to that place.
So one of the questions that we got basically right off the bat, what do we do with the murderers? I can't find it here, but what do we do with the murderers? What do we do with the pedophiles? Which is interestingly, because this is the first thing I asked her, which is, what do we do with the murderers? What do we do with the pedophiles? The people that we all universally agree are very bad. And
I don't remember what I said to you when you asked me that.
You actually sent me an article to read. Someone else had done the work on it, and
was it a illustration?
Yeah, it was an illustration.
The what?
I was like, it was like. Yeah. I didn't agree, but I understood. I was
like, you're like, I thought. The words from that were from Miriam Kaba. Her Instagram handle is Prison Culture. She is often private, so you might not get in right now, because y'all get on her nerves too much, and then she shuts it down.
Yeah, Kev, you get on her nerves, Kev.
But she's.
I'm sorry. What was it? Oh, thank you. All right, that's what I'm right now.
So the words from that illustration were from her. And again, I'm sorry, I can't remember the illustrator who put them together. There are a couple of different answers to that question, right? So one answer is a lot of those folks aren't in prison now already, right? So like you hear people talk about, and this is a thing that I hear about often that actually was not present in my family, but you hear people talk about like the uncle that you don't let the kids go near at Thanksgiving, right? And people talk about like, well, why is he still invited? But like, obviously, if he's still invited, he's not in prison. Most or a good number of folks who sexually assault adults and children currently are not in prison, often are not even brought up on charges. So our prison system isn't currently answering that, right? Like when I did domestic violence work, oftentimes survivors of domestic violence or intimate partner violence did not want their partners put in prison. They just wanted them to stop abusing them. And that part almost never gets answered. They either get sent to prison or they don't. They usually don't. And the abuse continues. So oftentimes the things that people come up with and say, well, what about these people? those people already aren't in prison. The majority of people in prison are not in prison for those specific types of crimes. So that's still a thing that we need to answer. Like, we need to be answering that right now, even if we don't agree to shut down prisons. We need to be answering, what do we do to these people who cause harm? Mm-hmm. And so another answer is, there are ways to separate people from other people without putting them in cages, that we haven't looked into or examined. A lot of this comes down to, we don't know, we being like people who are alive right now, we don't know another way, particularly people in the US. Other countries don't necessarily do prison the way the US does prison. So we just don't know another way. And so we don't imagine anything else. We just go to the fear of, well, I can't let this thing go because it's the only thing that exists. But like, we've tried prison, we've tried policing. I don't know people who personally feel satisfied with the results, other than we're told that that's what justice is, right? So even with the current issue of, going after these violent police officers, the ones who've been caught, people are really hung up on sending them to prison. And I get that instinct, and that used to be my instinct. And I'm not going to tell those people to not want those people to go to prison, because they're police officers. And but what does that answer? And does that give us justice? And on the other side of, even if these folks are convicted and they go to prison, does that answer our need for healing? Like, do we feel better once that's done? Do we feel safer? I've been to a lot of, and I'll stop after this, but I've been to a lot of commutation hearings. So oftentimes folks who are doing like really long sentences or life sentences sometimes have the option to apply for what's called commutation, which is basically like, in any given state, like the governor can commute this person's sentence and they're able to come home earlier than they would have, or at all if they weren't going to come home at all. And a lot of times the people who are considered the victims or the victim's family in these cases are present, and they give statements. And usually their statements are, don't let this person come home. This crime happened 20 years ago, and my life hasn't been the same, and I don't sleep and I don't eat and I can't hold down a job. And, this is really heartbreaking. And what you're hearing is that person hasn't healed. That person hasn't gotten any healing from this situation. And they still think that if this person stays in prison, then I'll have some peace. And that's because that's what we've sold them. That's what the system tells them. If this person goes to prison, then you get justice. But what we're not telling them is like, here are these services, here's some mental health. The state doesn't provide for them anything other than this person is now in prison. And because we believe that that's what justice equals, then that's what we seek, and that's what we hold on to. And that's what we're afraid to let go of when people start talking about abolition.
So I had a question, Kev. Stephanie, so is it like an organization that you're a part of that all have the same beliefs, or you're just kind of representing yourself, so to speak, in this?
I am always representing myself first and foremost. I don't want to get nobody in trouble.
I got you.
I am a member of an organization that I'm trying to be careful because prisons. I'm a member of an organization that often meets inside of a local prison that focuses on educating people about prison and prison systems and related topics. But not everybody in the group is a prison abolitionist. And so half the group is incarcerated men. And then the other half is non-incarcerated people who come into the prison, and we meet every week and we work on these projects and we educate folks. We obviously haven't been able to meet for the last couple of months. But everybody in the group doesn't believe the same thing. So a lot of us, and that's important to say, like all incarcerated people aren't abolitionists. And I guess all of the I think all of the outside members of the group would consider themselves abolitionists. The only reason I was being careful in answering that is because of the way the prison system is set up. On the off chance that somebody from the prison saw this, they might just be like, "You're not in the group anymore. You can't come in."
Well, the reason I was asking is because I don't know if and you'll be able to answer this. So let's say we're like, okay, we're gonna get rid of prisons, defund the police. A guy does armed robbery. Could you take us through the process of like what you would like to see happen if a person that commits a crime, we'll say armed robbery?
I can take you through on this television screen what I would like to see happen. Because that might not be an ethical response, but I think that's the thing that people. So I understand that that's the thing people want an answer to, right? What do we do? My personal answer for that is, what do we do? What do the people in that community want done? There's an organization in Brooklyn called, the director's name is Danielle Sered, Sered. Common Justice might be the name of it. She's written a book called Until We Reckon, and the organization does restorative justice. And essentially, they are one of the few spaces in this country where, for particular crimes, and armed robbery would be one of them, for particular types of crimes, the court has the option to check in with the victim or survivor of the crime and ask them if they would like to participate in a restorative justice process instead of this person going through the criminal legal process. And if the victim survivor wants to, then they agree to that. And then essentially this organization leads the person who committed harm and the person or persons who were harmed through this restorative justice process. And so they begin that process. And so they're not like the creators of restorative justice. This is like a thing that has existed for a very long time. But they're an organization that practices it. And so what that looks like is they bring those two parties together and they ask the person who was harmed, what would you like this person to do to restore? Right. And so that could look like, well, I want this person to, have to do community service in my neighborhood, or I want this person to give X amount of money to XYZ organizations, or I want this person to, there's a space that I can't walk past anymore because that's where I was robbed. And I want this person to like go create something beautiful in that space so that I have a different vision when I walk past it. Right. And so they leave it up to the individual who was harmed to participate in the process of figuring out what happens. And so they don't let them like, I want this person to be shot. Okay, that's the answer. It's always a response that doesn't then cause more harm. But what that's about, again, is imagination, is coming up with answers that are different than, well, this person committed armed robbery, so obviously they need to go to prison. Right. So going to prison solves the part of keeping that person from committing armed robbery again, maybe. But it doesn't give anything back to the community. It doesn't give anything back to that person. And it takes away, and this is in that book, Until We Reckon, it takes away the responsibility of that person who caused harm actually like doing work to repair. Going to prison isn't doing work. Like, you're just away. You're not giving anything back. You're not learning anything about what happened. You're not, because sometimes the response would be like, oh, I want this person to read about XYZ. So my answer to your question, Jay, is I don't know. That's what we come up with as a community. And that's what we participate in together. And that's what we, it brings back the responsibility of an individual having accountability to what they've taken from or what they've done. And it also brings a community to get together in the process of figuring out healing, because we don't do that in the current setup.
So go ahead, Kev. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'll go. You go ahead, Kev.
I think I'm reading through the comments. They're not all questions from the Patreon. Thank you for you guys watching live. I think people's knee-jerk response, which was mine, if you don't have an answer for the current thing, then should we even be going to that, right? Like I see people like, is prison reform different from a prison abolitionist? You sold me on prison reform. I think I saw one that said you sold me on prison reform, but you got a long way to go to prison for prison abolitionists. And I think your answer isn't, from what I understand, it's not that you have the answer. It's that we as a community have to decide what that is, right? I saw another question in here, and I guess I'd like you to answer this one. But isn't prison a deterrent for people?
If prison was a deterrent from people, we wouldn't need prisons anymore. Like, how long has prison existed and people still do things that they know they can go to prison for and they end up in prison, right? Like, if prison is a deterrent, it's not a very good one.
Yeah, I don't think it's really much of a deterrent. Of course, you have the chance of going to prison, but if you're hungry and you need still to eat, you more than likely are going to commit a crime and or what's classified as a crime. I want to say one thing. I don't know how to phrase it into a question. I think one of my issues has been the decriminalization of marijuana. Mm-hmm. There hasn't been much of a, like, especially here in LA, you know, since I moved here, weed was illegal, but pretty much used openly. Then the moment it was legalized, there was already basically, it's called MedMen. There was basically an Apple store of weed, like high quality store. They were doing brand deals and stuff. So even before it became legal, people with money were able to apply for licenses, build businesses. So it's like, as soon as it became legal, people with money were able to capitalize on it. But people who are in jail for weed charges, either using or selling, haven't been released. So I guess my question is, why so far to reform the abolition for the people? Because reform would say, okay, this isn't a crime anymore. You guys who did this crime should be able to come out. But you are saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are you saying nothing should be considered a crime and no one should be locking up other people?
I'm not saying nothing should be considered a crime. That's a good question. I would push back and say that reform is how it's currently happening. I would say that that reform is marijuana is no longer illegal. The end, which is what's currently happening, right? Yeah, people who are already locked up, that already happened to y'all. We can't be worried about that. New people, particularly white people who have access to capital to start these businesses, y'all can do that. That, to me, that's reform. Abolition is asking, okay, now what do we do with all these people we already locked up for selling weed?
Yeah.
What happens to them? Why are they still there? And so there have been, and so a lot of activists have been focusing their energy on what happens to those people. What are y'all doing about this? And that's still like an ongoing question. But so that's where I would make that distinction, and that I think that is reform. Is that, and be clear, there are reforms that I think and that a lot of abolitionists think are useful, as they can be used as steps towards abolition. But there are some reforms that are used, I believe, to pacify so that we stop asking about abolition. It's like, here, we gave you this, so like, be good with it.
Now, here's one thing I want to say, because I see a lot of comments that people are
dragging me.
Not dragging, but frustrated, right? This is a really new idea for most people. But I just want to make a clarifying point. Slavery was integrated into the fabric of American culture, and we went to civil war over slavery. People who relied on slaves for money, resources, America's economy was tied into slavery. There was literally no vision of how do we do this without slaves. We don't have to pay these people. We just have to feed them.
It's
right?
Great.
Yeah. Like, why would we want to change that? Right. So I think most of the people here and watching this in the comments can at least agree, especially if you've seen Ava DuVernay's 13, that slavery really led to the prison industrial complex. And you can agree that, I would hope you can agree that Black and brown people are disproportionately represented in prisons, disproportionately targeted by police, killed by police in every way, shape, and form, right? And I think even back to the crime bill, right? There was Black people who were like, yes, 3 strikes. Yes, like, because there's this feeling of we need to feel safe, right?
Absolutely.
And I think I don't, well, actually, I'll ask you, because I feel like I don't technically feel safe right now. I don't feel safe from criminals, and I don't feel safe from police either. I actually feel more afraid from police than criminals. I actually interact with police. Every time I see a police car behind me, around me, near me, my heart starts beating fast, and I don't even be committing crimes. I'm just like existing. I remember one time I was walking to All Death. There was 4 cops on each side of the road. And I realized, and they weren't even menacing or nothing. They were actually smiling. And I was walking with a friend of mine. And I realized once I got on the other side of them, I held my breath the entire time I was walking in between of them. And this was 10 o'clock in the morning, middle of downtown LA, no crime, nothing in my backpack. And I just didn't even realize I was holding my breath and like kind of tensing up. So I understand why people in the comments are like, no way, we can't. But I just want you to know that there was a time at all, especially the people who had slaves. And on top of that, there's a lot of people who benefit from prison as well, like literally monetarily. Like if you watch the 13, one of the things I didn't realize is how much of the prison system is monetized, right? Phones, the food, the healthcare, like there's for-profit prisons. It's a business. So, there's been stories of people paying judges, prisons paying judges to, lock more people up and then giving them kickbacks, right? That disproportionately affects us. So I just wanted to say, that because I feel like, one of the things that somebody said, which I think is very unfair, she must live in a good neighborhood. Like, I think that's unfair. She really doesn't, right? And it's unfair to assume that she lives in a suburb because she doesn't agree with prison. But here's a question I want to ask. I know I was talking for a long time. People are saying, if you don't believe in prisons, Miss Ma'am, what do you say should happen to the cop that killed George Floyd? And I asked you this on Twitter. What you say now, Rhythm? What you say about that with your little prison ideology?
You did. You were like, what about this? I'll answer that in a couple of different ways. First,